You're listening to international investment advisor Doug Goldstein on the Goldstein on Gelt show, the financial show where we'll talk about how you can make the most of your money. With all the confusing financial chatter bombarding you each and every day, Goldstein on Gelt will give you the practical information you want and need about living a financially stable life. Here's your host, money maven Doug Goldstein.
Okay, I'm very excited to be talking with Nyle Bayer. Nyle is a good friend of mine. He specializes in retirement plan asset management, and I've actually brought him back to the present because he spends a lot of time in the future. Maybe you've seen him there on his podcast called The Financial Time Traveler. Hey, Nyle, how's it going?
Great. Thanks for having me, Doug.
You know, I wanted to start by telling you something. I don't know if you knew about me, but I know about you because I read your website. You are partners or have worked with your dad, Anton Bayer, right?
Correct. That's right. He's my dad, the old man.
So when I started in the business like 25 years ago, I was partners with my mother, who was a vice president at a major brokerage firm she and I worked at together. And I'm guessing kind of like you, I learned a lot from working with my mother.
That's so cool. You know, I did know that because I read your book. And so, I learned about you there, but I thought it was a very cool point. It's kind of a rarity. And to have that trust, I think, in an environment that is very dynamic and changing, it's hard to trust people. To have a mentor that you can really lean into is priceless. And I think that really compresses experience and time in its own sense to have that available to you. So I feel like we can relate outside of everything else because of that.
I think it was very cool also working with my mother because actually before she was a financial advisor, she had been a teacher and she kind of had the heart of a teacher. And so when I started in the business, she and I would have our client meetings together. I think what I learned from her the most was just the importance of explaining to clients in terms that they can understand what's going on with their money, because unlike other people in the office who are always trying to like pitch something, oh, buy this stock, it's going to make a lot of money. How did they know, right? They didn't know anything. And my mother was very humble. She said, listen, I don't know what's going to happen in the market. I'm not a prophet, but I'll explain to you what's going on and what the risks are. And then you'll make a decision, an educated decision.
I like that a lot. And correct me if I'm wrong, but your grandmother was also like a pioneer on Wall Street,
sir.
Correct?
My grandmother was one of the first women to be licensed as a stockbroker in America.
So cool. So cool. So you were born for this.
I was born with the Wall Street spoon in my mouth, I guess.
It's a good spoon to have.
I'll tell you what's funny. One of the things that my mother always said and my grandmother said, and we liked stocks, and we would talk about stocks in the world, but they always pointed out how there were some people who were really bad stock pickers. And especially it was people who often were very confident. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of my clients when I worked in New York were doctors, and I love doctors. My dad was a doctor. My sister's a doctor. But they were like the worst stock pickers, but they would say things with such conviction. Have you found that kind of attitude?
Absolutely. I think overconfidence, and I believe it's a metacognition bias where it shows that the more confident you are actually displays that you have less competence in that field. And the more competence you have, the more likely you are to admit that you have less confidence. So I think that is a very alarming bias that we see, and that the more confidence that we have with people who don't have an expertise, I think should be an instant red flag. As well as, like you said, with your grandmother, your mother being very educational in her approach and having that teacher's touch. It's the same thing with clients, with myself, and learning very quickly that if you don't know, it's okay to admit that you don't know and just to assess the probabilities. But very common, I think, in all areas of our life, not just in finance, where people might be buying the car that they're very confident about, even though it has a terrible engine or bad manufacturer, all the way down to the decisions we're making about our health as well as our finances.
Yeah, it's funny you say about making decisions because we make decisions all day.
Right.
And one of the problems, actually, a study that was done in Israel, which I thought was very interesting, was about this concept of decision fatigue, where it sounds like you're just tired, but there's more to it than that. The study here was done. They looked at prisoners going for parole in front of a parole board. And what they discovered is that in the beginning of the day, if you were a prisoner who showed up at the beginning of the day to get parole, your odds of getting parole were something like 70 or 80%. But if you showed up at the end of the day, your odds were like 10% of getting parole.
Wow.
And this study has been repeated in various ways, but the conclusion is that people would get very tired of making decisions, and just after a while they would go with the easiest default, which in the case of a parole judge would be don't grant parole because you don't want to let a criminal out, so it's easier just not to grant parole. How do you think that might apply in investing?
Well, the analysis paralysis that occurs with all the news that is out there. The phone in your pocket today is so much more powerful than the computer that we had at MIT in the 60s, a million times more powerful. So all of this over information, especially as I talk to 401k plans and 401k participants that need to allocate their own money in a retirement sponsored plan, they don't know where to go just because they've been making all their decisions all day long, and then they have to learn a whole new discipline. And when I sit down and say, it's very simple with you in having this long-term goals and duration that you can weather the volatility storm and make it much more simple to them. It's like an exhaust of relief that, okay, I can make this decision because I've already made too many. And I think there was another study done that's why Mark Zuckerberg and other CEOs are wearing the exact same clothes every single day. Is because of decision fatigue. So it's aligned with the exact same study, which I think is very interesting.
I just thought they were just lazy about changing. They didn't want to bother to pull something else off the shelf. But
lack of style.
Lack of style. That could be. That's what happens in technology. We're talking with Nyle Bayer, who specializes in retirement plan asset management. He's got a fantastic podcast called The Financial Time Traveler. Now, you mentioned this thing before about over-information. I think you just mean, too much information out there. Why is having too much information a problem for people in making big decisions?
I think there's a lot to unpack there, but I think it especially impacts people who don't have an expertise in the field. When you have an expertise in the field, you can quickly filter out what is good and bad information and where to get good and bad information. For instance, when I'm looking at studies that are stating that we have a 9-year bull market happening on the S&P, or just overall in the overall market, and they're just quoting the S&P 500, I can very quickly dismiss that article as an investment professional that knows, okay, they're just looking at one index. They're not comparing across the board. They're not even looking at this 20% intraday drop that we had in 2011. But for someone else who might not have that expertise, they could see both my article debating that and the article that says it's true and just feel like, I can't make a decision because I don't know which one's right, and I don't have the expertise to be able to evaluate it. So at the end of the day, I'm just going to be right back where I started, and that is just as frustrating. So having conviction can be eluding, but then also not knowing where to be convicted can also cause a problem. And that's where having, I think, the trust and authenticity relationship with someone who does have expertise can be a tremendous helper towards your greater success.
I think that what people really have to realize is that there is no one who knows what's going to happen in the market. And if you decide, I'm going to really study and I'm going to figure it out and I'm going to read all this, you really think that you're going to get it? Warren Buffett's out there too, and he's reading 1,000 pages a day. So odds are you won't be able to compete at that level. So I like what you're saying is you've got to find someone who's going to kind of help you to make the decisions. But don't you think, or do you find that people say to you in your capacity as a financial advisor, they say, hey, Nyle, come on, you must know better. Just tell me where I should invest my money.
Oh, all the time. And there is no one answer. And I think if you study even Warren Buffett and all the greatest traders, you quickly find that when they're asked what their biggest trade was that they can remember, it's always going to be a trade where they lost a bunch of money. And it's usually because they were 100% all in on one trade. And so to be able to not make those same mistakes, it's not going to have one answer. There's not going to be one trade that you should do this or be all in on this index fund or even an ETF or mutual fund, whatever, bond. There is no simple answer for a complex question. And so to be able to diversify out so that you don't correlate your monies with each and every growth aspect is what makes sense with how you're aligned. So it shouldn't be something that is constantly changed towards the market, but it should be changed with your lifestyle and what's happening with your life, and then we diversify accordingly. Does that make the most sense to you, Doug?
It is sensible to me when I'm wondering, and I'm sort of thinking through conversations I've had with clients. In my day job as a financial advisor, I probably spend most of the time just talking to people, not about investments per se, what fund or stock or money manager or bond. I spend a lot more time talking about who they are and what they want. And we spend a lot of time talking about risk and all sorts of hypotheticals, what would happen if your portfolio were to drop. And I don't say, 5%. I say, what would happen if you lost $50,000 next month? What would you do? And I find, and sort of going back to what we said a little bit before, is that the difference between what the husbands say and what the wives say is fascinating. Oftentimes, the husbands are so confident in their decision. And I know, because I think I've been doing this now about 25 years, I know that they don't really understand what's going on. If they know the risks that are involved in investing, why are they still acting so confident when it could really turn out badly for them?
I think that's just that cognitive dissonance that comes in where they just feel like they have to be confident or else there's no better decision to be able to make and move forward. I'm not sure why. The ego has to play into that, especially with
Maybe
the
that's
men.
true, actually.
And we were talking about the Berkeley study where women beat out the men with their trading accounts because they were more consistent, and the men had to overtrade to feel like they were confident and knew what they were doing and to look kind of macho that, oh yeah, I'm constantly trading and buying and selling and buying and selling. Where the women just felt like, I'm going to stay the course, and that ended up playing out better for them.
It is funny. It's funny you say that because, they often talk about, there are a lot more men in the financial world than women. And I always remember when I read this, I found this shocking because, first of all, when I started in the business, my boss was a woman and my partner was a woman and my grandmother was a finance person. So I guess that's maybe why they did pretty well with their investing. Nyle, we've done pretty well here, but unfortunately we are just about out of time. So tell me in the last few seconds, how can people follow you and follow your work?
So you can reach me wherever social medias are displayed. You find us at Financial Time Traveler, spelled right out on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We're all over the place. Or if you want to follow me and get a little less market commentary and a little more images with my kids, you can find me at Nyle Bayer, anywhere, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I'm all over the place, so you can find me there.
And the podcast too, the Financial Time Traveler.
Oh yeah, anywhere the podcasts are played. I mean, we're just everywhere. It's crazy. As well as I'm going to go get back into my DeLorean flux capacitor and head out to the future self.
That's awesome. So I really appreciate your spending time with us in the year 2017. Nyle Bayer, thanks so much for joining us. Take care.
Thanks, Doug.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Check out all of Doug's money ideas at goldsteinongelt.com. Doug specializes in helping people who live outside the United States handle their U.S. investment accounts. If you have a question that you would like answered on the air or off, contact Doug at his website or send him an email to doug@profile-financial.com.